Okay, should be helpful to study for the final exam in government. So on your own, do a lot of studying before, but this will give you a good outline of what to study, and the things to look at here are, first of all, in general, a bunch of handout notes, class outlines, quizzes, any tests at home and in class. Those are really good. I'll use the same kind of questions. Read over the text review questions, which are listed at the bottom of that second page. Let me see if I can find it. On the second page, make sure it's here. There's a few here. It's not quite listed the same way as you have it, but page 18, you look through go to that page and the reviewing lesson questions 4 and 7, page 42 number 1, page 72 1 through 4, and so forth. So follow those directions. Going back to the specific topics, the natural rights philosophy is a general idea that's going to flow through the whole test. Multiple choice, matching, short answer, longer answers. This would be a longer answer question. Just write the natural rights philosophy in a paragraph. Need to make sure you have John Locke listed. Maybe say something about that it was in the 1680s, maybe, I don't know. What is stress? The rights of the individual, specifically the natural rights. We said the philosophy kind of goes like life, liberty, and property. All men are created equal. The purpose of the government is to secure those rights, and the people give their consent to the government. But if the government fails to secure or protect those rights, then the individuals and the people have a right to revolt or withdraw their consent and start another government. Classical republicanism, common good, and civic virtue is stress as opposed to the rights of the individual. Go through those notes on that. First democracy is in Athens, first republic is in Rome. Know the terms democracy, monarchy, rule by many, rule by one grabbing power. Aristocracy is ruled by the elite. Oligarchy is ruled by a few. Civic virtue, there's a definition: serve the public, then put aside public power to return to personal life again. Highest calling of the Roman citizen is civic virtue. Some people, as an example from history, was George Washington and Cincinnatus. You'll recall that from your notes. Common good, what is good for the whole society. Constitution provides a government structure and usually limits power, written or unwritten. Limited government, this is just a basic principle of our Constitution. And good government is that it's limited, and it's usually limited by the Constitution. Representative government or representative democracy, our Constitution guarantees that the government must be in Republican form, which is representative democracy. Some definitions there. What are some precedents to our system? Basic common ideas, that the king may not, but the parliament is the only power to tax. Writ of habeas corpus, the right to be at one's own trial. It's one of the fundamental rights, but it's a precedent for a democratic society. English common law based on customs and traditions. Magna Carta from the year 1215. The details of it, that was King John versus the nobles in England. and the nobles forced, you might say, but the John, without violence, gave up some of his powers to the nobles. And so this is the first power sharing document in English history, and it's a precedent. It's a precedent for sharing of power and limiting power. Other details of this would be right to bear arms, freedom of speech, writ of habeas corpus. This is in Magna Carta. No taxation without representation, goes back to the Magna Carta. The first parliament's a place where people are represented in the government. 1295 is the first working parliament in England. First legislature in America goes to 1619. In Virginia, called the House of Burgesses. Know that. 3 types of early colonies. You need to know that. The royal, the proprietary, and self-governing. This is more like a business. Proprietary. Royal is directly controlled by the king. Self-governing colonies. There were 2. Rhode Island and Connecticut. You'll recall that was asked several times. Civil body politic is a phrase, the idea of self-government, that people will make laws and will obey them, and they will decide to change the laws if they're not the best laws for the common good. This happened in 1620 in Massachusetts, actually Plymouth, Massachusetts. First written agreement on self-government. That's a good question. English Bill of Rights is fast forwarding a little bit to 1689, after what was called the Glorious Revolution. You might remember that. Glorious Revolution. Oh, there's where you put it. Glorious Revolution of 1688. And this succeeded the English Civil War. Some of the details of the English Bill of Rights, which precedes the Virginia Declaration of Rights and the Bill of Rights in the United States Constitution. No man is above the law. No taxation without representation. The right to petition the king. Right to keep and bear arms. Free elections. In other words, representative government. Obviously, you can pause this and get this a little bit slower if you're missing some of these. Freedom of speech, no excessive fines or cruel and unusual punishment. You can see that these are precede or forerunners or precedents to the Bill of Rights. Moving along to the colonial period, you can see these are good questions on Massachusetts, on the Stamp Act. The 3 main reasons: independence was unavoidable, war and independence was unavoidable. We talked about how important that is. No, the author of Common Sense is Thomas Paine. We talked about these basic abuses. There were actually 27 abuses listed in the Declaration of Independence, but here's a few, and just try to get some. I'll probably ask you a question on what are some abuses, or you match up something with abuses of the King of England. Earliest state constitutions: Connecticut and Rhode Island. Connecticut is the first one from 1636. Rhode Island, Massachusetts was also pretty early, and so was Virginia. But those 2 right there are the most early. What was the unique about the Massachusetts state constitution that made it a model? You can look on that page, 54, but mainly that there were 3 branches, and also that it had a strong executive branch. It was the only state constitution that had 3 branches. Articles of Confederation, right before our constitution time. The weaknesses in no power to tax, and and very little executive authority. Taxing was basically asking for taxes. But it did have some monumental achievements, especially from 1785 and 6 is the Northwest Ordinance, Law in New States. Okay, let me go to the next page. Here we are. And I need it a little bigger for you guys. What event showed Americans that a stronger government was necessary? You probably did some work on this, and you remember it's Shays' Rebellion. 3 meetings you need to know about: Mount Vernon in 85, Annapolis in 86, and 1787 in Philadelphia. Main roles: know about Washington, Adams, and Jefferson, Hamilton, of course, Madison, and Morris, and why. I'm going to ask you a question on that. I can't remember if it's obligatory or it's an optional, but give me 4 players and their roles in the Constitution, and there they are. Who did not attend? Kind of a trick question here, but Adams and Jefferson did not. They were in Europe. Patrick Henry, Sam Adams, some people that were fearful. Number of delegates, you can look that up, but it's 55. Rhode Island did not send any delegates. Why? They were trying to sort of sabotage, and they knew that you needed all the states represented, but that's not exactly what happened. They did not need all the states represented. It was done in secret so that they would have the best ideas and the politics would not get involved. Know these terms, especially federalism. These 2 guys, Oliver Ellsworth and Roger Sherman, they were from Connecticut. So sometimes the Constitution, part of the constitutional representation has to do with it. It's called the Connecticut Compromise. 2 main plans they are, Virginia and New Jersey plans. 2 main issues to be resolved was representation and the power sharing. And how is it resolved? You should go back to your notes. It's basically about how the House and the Senate are divided. One is equal, one is proportional, and one is divided into two as well. Examples of separation of powers: limited government and sharing of power. You need to know at least these examples. For example, in lawmaking, a legislative and executive branch share power. The legislative branch writes the bills and they vote on it, and the executive branch has to sign it, or he may veto it. And the legislative branch could actually override the veto of the executive branch. The Supreme Court is appointed by the executive branch and approved by the Senate or the legislative branch. The ambassadors are the same thing, appointed by the executive, approved by the Senate. They need 60%. The treaties are signed by the executive, but they're approved by the Senate. War-making, declaration of war, is by the legislative branch, but the commander-in-chief is the executive branch. Those are good ways of showing power sharing and separation of powers. Look over on page 76 and page 77 the details of the Great Compromise and the 3/5 Compromise. Why did the northern states agree to this about slavery? Well, they needed the southern states to keep the Union, to keep things flowing forward. Main structure of the government. See the congressional leadership sheet. This make sure that you follow this. Who controls the purse? We talked about the legislative branch, but specifically it's the House of Representatives. See the executive branch sheet, see your legislative branch sheet, see your congressional leadership sheet. That's very important. And all of these are all answered. Which is the deliberative body, and that is the legislative branch. The executive branch is much more like an executor, someone who is moving with lots of immediate powers. Look on page 82 for the Electoral College. Make sure you remember it's 270 votes, electoral votes to become president. Know the several ways that a bill becomes a law. For example, we just mentioned one. The House votes 50%, it needs a majority. The Senate votes, needs a 50% or more majority, and then the president signs it. That's one way. Another way is the House and the Senate vote approve the bill, and it goes to the president and he vetoes it. It goes back to the House and they re-vote. They must have 2/3 override majority, and the Senate must vote 2/3 majority to override, and then it becomes a law. A third way is the House and the Senate both approve the bill, goes to the president, and he does not sign it. He does not veto it, he does not sign it. After 10 days it becomes a law. There is actually another way of doing it. Upon a veto, House, Senate, and then there's a veto, it goes back to the House and Senate. They change the bill wording, re-vote, the president then will sign it. So there's actually a fourth way. Principles of Constitution that we talked about. You have notes on this. Go back, make sure you understand those. Those are real basic. Federalism, again, is probably the key here in terms of a specific way of defining it. It's the national and the state governments working in tandem together. Know the main ideas of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and know the main people. John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton for the Federalists and the Federalist Papers. Freedom of speech versus national security. I think if you were there with the debate, you won't have any trouble with a couple of questions on that. Good to go over your test and the packet on the Q&A on the Constitution. That's a good prep as well. It's got both the answers there. Know the preamble. That's another optional. You'll have several questions on the final exam, probably a group of 8 to 10, and you'll need a long answer for them, but you choose probably 5 or 6 of them. And there's always something on the natural rights philosophy, something about quoting from memory the preamble to the Constitution, probably quoting from the Declaration of Independence, you know, the beginning, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and so forth, all the way down. Maybe add something about the last quote in the Declaration of Independence. And lastly, look over all the text review questions, and those are the best questions that I might ask you. But don't worry about any other ones that I don't have here listed. Wouldn't hurt you to look over them, but I won't ask anything other than these specifically. So I hope that works for you. Any questions, just let me know.